I want you to imagine slicing open a human head. But instead of finding a brain inside, the entire cavity is just filled with this dense, glowing web of digital icons.
It's a pretty wild image.
Right. You're looking at, like, gears, smartphone notifications, magnifying glasses, and social media arrows. All of it wired into this blindingly bright light bulb right in the center.
It really is an arresting visual to put right on the cover of the source material. I mean, it forces you to just stop and process what you're actually looking at.
And it sets the stakes immediately,
Yeah.
because that image is the perfect metaphor for you, the listener, and honestly for the entire human race right now.
Yeah.
But it's specifically targeted at the next generation. We can no longer separate human cognitive development from this glowing digital hardware. And that is the mission for our deep dive today.
Yeah.
We are unpacking a massive, exhaustive 2026 report from the EU Commission for Social Policy, Education, Employment, Research, and Culture. We're looking at how society protects youth in the digital sphere. And this is driven by one staggering statistic. 97% of EU youth are now online daily.
Right, and that 97%, it fundamentally transforms the internet. It goes from a tool you use occasionally into the actual environment you inhabit. I mean, it's the air they breathe.
Which means the rules governing that air are incredibly important. Now, before we break down the machinery of those rules, we do need to thank our sponsors, www.myprivacy.blog and www.compliancehub.wiki.
Two very fitting sponsors for today's topic.
Highly fitting. If you find yourself fascinated by the unseen mechanics of data privacy and regulatory compliance that we are about to explore, you absolutely have to check them out. Because let me tell you, the regulatory landscape we're about to decode is a total labyrinth.
It really is a labyrinth, and it's built on top of this massive societal tension. The report highlights data showing that 93% of Europeans are currently demanding urgent public intervention for children's mental health online.
93% is huge.
It's almost everybody. The public sees that glowing wiring in the head and, well, they are terrified. But the harsh reality of governance is that regulation moves at a glacial pace while the technology is just sprinting.
So the core question is, how do you build a fence around a target that fundamentally changes its own physics every 6 months?
Right.
So whether you are a parent agonizing over screen time limits, a tech professional designing an interface, or just a deeply curious digital citizen trying to understand the invisible forces shaping society, we're going to look at the massive legal shields Europe is trying to forge right now.
The foundation of that shield in the EU rests on three massive regulatory frameworks. So you have the GDPR, which dictates data privacy.
Right. We all know the cookie banners from that one.
Exactly. Then you have the AVMSD, which is the Audiovisual Media Services Directive. That one tackles harmful content specifically on video platforms. And then you have the heavy hitter, the DSA, or Digital Services Act, which governs overall platform safety.
Okay, but let's unpack this a bit, because it sounds like the EU is trying to write a universal building code for a digital city that is constantly changing its own physics.
Right.
And they aren't just operating in a vacuum here, right? They're pulling blueprints from other places.
Yeah, they are heavily inspired by the UK's age-appropriate design code. What the UK did was conceptually separate two things that used to be totally tangled together.
Okay, what were they?
The age of consent for data processing and the age of full data protection rights. So in the UK framework, a platform might allow, say, a 13-year-old to consent to create an account.
Right.
But the platform is still legally required to provide enhanced default privacy protections for that user until they turn 18.
Wait, I'm lost. If the age of consent to use the service is 13, how can the platform be forced to protect them until 18? Don't those two realities contradict each other?
It sounds contradictory until you look at the actual mechanism. It means a 14-year-old can use the app, but the app's code is legally barred from activating geolocation tracking or, sharing that teen's behavioral data with third-party data brokers.
I see.
The UK code and the incoming EU equivalent dictates that platforms must default to the highest possible privacy settings automatically. And this is particularly crucial when dealing with the phenomenon called sharenting.
Oh boy. Right. The parents who document every single hiccup and milestone of their toddler's life on public social media feeds.
Yeah, right.
I mean, we all have that one friend whose child has a larger digital footprint at age 3 than I do at my current age.
It's super common. But the unseen danger of sharenting is data harvesting. Those photos and locations don't just sit in a void.
Where do they go?
They are scraped into facial recognition databases, or in worst-case scenarios, they end up on predatory sites. So by forcing platforms to default to high privacy, the law shifts the burden of risk mitigation.
Away from the parents, you mean?
Right, away from a parent's naive assumption of safety, and it forces the platform's actual architecture to act as the primary defense.
But let me push back on this entire premise. Because laws are ultimately just paper.
Sure.
If I am a savvy 14-year-old kid who wants to bypass a restriction, I navigate to a site, a pop-up appears, and I just click the button that says, yes, I am 18. The gate opens.
The classic loophole.
Right. Do these broad strokes, these massive legal frameworks in Brussels, actually change anything on the ground for a teenager holding a smartphone in their bedroom?
What's fascinating here is that click yes loophole is exactly what the Digital Services Act is attempting to destroy.
Wait, really? How do you destroy a button?
Under the DSA, very large online platforms, what the EU calls VLOPs, are forced to conduct systemic risk assessments of their own algorithms. So it is no longer about whether a teenager lied on a web form.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If a platform's recommender system is proven to actively push minors towards self-harm content or extreme eating disorder rabbit holes, the platform is legally liable for the design of that code.
Okay, but how does a government actually audit a private trillion-dollar tech company's proprietary algorithm? Do they just send a strongly worded letter asking nicely for the source code?
No, not at all. Regulators use a few concrete mechanisms. They require deep API access, which allows independent researchers to monitor data flows. But more importantly, they use synthetic users.
Synthetic users, like bots.
Exactly like bots. Regulators deploy automated bot profiles designed to mimic the browsing behavior of a 13-year-old. They unleashed these synthetic users onto the platform and measure exactly what the recommender system feeds them.
That is wild.
And if the synthetic 13-year-old is suddenly inundated with manipulative or dangerous content, the platform has failed the audit. They have to fix the code at the architectural level.
Okay, but if the EU is forcing these mega platforms to completely overhaul their code, why are the 2026 numbers in this report getting worse instead of better?
Well,
Because the gap between the law and the reality on the ground must be massive. If the platform's code is the battlefield, we need to understand exactly what the weapons look like today.
the reality is deeply concerning. The report cites the 2025 Thorn data, and the statistics on grooming and exploitation are just chilling. In 2024, 1 in 3 boys aged 9 to 12 experienced an online sexual interaction.
Wait, 1 in 3 9-year-olds.
Exactly. The data shows 12% received explicit messages, and 9% were actively solicited for explicit images.
That's horrifying.
And the most dangerous element is the location. This isn't happening on some hidden corner of the dark web. It is happening in the standard chat features of mainstream online gaming platforms.
Yeah.
Yes. And 20% of these children didn't disclose the interaction to anyone in the real world.
That is the part that just stops you in your tracks.
Yeah.
But why gaming platforms? Why is that the new frontier instead of traditional social media?
It really comes down to the mechanics of the environment. Predators use the cooperative mechanics built into the video game to bypass a child's natural stranger danger defenses.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. If a stranger approaches a child on a street, the child's alarm bells ring. But in a game, if a player heals your character in a firefight or, gifts you a rare piece of digital armor, they are utilizing the game's mechanics to manufacture trust and reciprocity.
Wow.
The predator becomes a teammate. By the time the conversation moves to a private chat, the child's guard is completely down.
The weaponization of teamwork, that's horrifying. But the harms outlined in the report aren't just predatory, right? There's a massive section dedicated to the cognitive impact of the technology itself, even when no bad actors are involved.
Yeah, that brings us to a really fascinating study from the MIT Media Lab on the concept of cognitive debt.
Cognitive debt.
Researchers examined students who were using large language models, tools like ChatGPT, to write essays. But they didn't just grade the final papers. They used EEG analysis to monitor the students' actual brain activity while they worked.
Wait, they physically wired up their heads to measure the electrical signals while the AI wrote for them?
They did. And what the EEG scans revealed was that students relying on LLMs exhibited significantly lower brain connectivity and cognitive engagement compared to students who wrestled with the writing process on their own.
Lower connectivity.
Right. The researchers noted a steep decline in semantic processing.
Okay, what does a decline in semantic processing actually mean for a student sitting in a classroom?
Well, semantic processing is how the brain assigns meaning and builds a deep web of connections required for true comprehension. Like when you struggle to find the right word or restructure a sentence to make an argument flow, your brain is laying down permanent
Well,
tracks.
because of the effort.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The EEG showed that by offloading that friction to an AI, the brain doesn't form those deep connections. Over a 4-month period, the students using AI showed lower recall and a much weaker sense of ownership over their ideas.
Hmm.
The technology provides immediate fluency, but the cost is a long-term cognitive debt.
Okay, I have to jump in here and hold a line. Because isn't this just the classic calculators will ruin math argument dressed up in new neuroscience?
I hear that a lot.
I mean, when calculators became mainstream, educators panicked. Right, they were convinced kids would never learn long division. Now we just use calculators to bypass the busy work so we can focus on higher level calculus.
Hmm.
Aren't kids just adapting to a new set of tools? My brain isn't broken just because I don't memorize phone numbers anymore.
It is a really common defense, but the calculator analogy falls apart when you look at the intent of the design. A calculator is a tool of pure static utility.
What do you mean?
It sits on your desk. It does not possess an agenda. It is not engineered to keep you pressing its buttons for 6 hours straight.
Okay, but a history textbook has an agenda, right?
Yeah.
To teach a specific curriculum. Why is the design of modern digital platforms fundamentally different from, like, a really engaging television show we watched in the 90s?
The difference is the interactive feedback loop fueled by neuromarketing. A television show is a broadcast. It doesn't change its plot based on how your people's dilate.
Right, it just plays.
But digital platforms, social feeds, and immersive VR environments are actively applying neuroscience to hijack attention. They utilize mechanisms like variable reward schedules.
You mean like a slot machine? Pulling the refresh lever and hoping for a dopamine hit of a new notification or a funny video?
That is the exact mechanism. You pair that slot machine dynamic with infinite scroll and algorithmic curation, and you have an environment specifically designed to exploit the developing cognitive processes of a child.
Jesus.
The tool is no longer passive. It is an active manipulator.
So the environment itself is hostile.
Yes. And that leads to what the medical community now terms problematic social media use, or PSMU.
PSMU. Okay, how is that different from just a kid being glued to their phone?
This is clinically distinct from a teenager who just likes spending time online. PSMU occurs when a child entirely loses control over their screen time despite experiencing obvious, severe distress.
Like it's an addiction.
Exactly. They are losing sleep, their academic performance is plummeting, they are withdrawing from real-world relationships, but the persuasive design of the platform traps them in a behavioral loop they cannot break.
Okay, so let me summarize where we are. We have predatory adults weaponizing video game teamwork. We have AI interfaces causing measurable cognitive debt. And we have algorithms utilizing slot machine psychology to trigger clinical distress.
That's the current landscape, yeah.
And as we established, waiting for massive EU regulations to take effect takes years. The gap is deadly. Which brings us to the local and regional authorities, the LRAs.
The people on the ground.
Right, the people forced to deal with this right now.
The contrast in how different European regions are fighting this battle on the ground is really a masterclass in varied governance. The report essentially splits them into two philosophies. On one side, you have the regulatory-centered approach, which is favored by countries like Germany and France.
What does that look like in practice? Is it just more rules?
It is very top-down and legally binding. For instance, France recently legislated a digital majority age set at 15.
Digital majority.
Meaning below that age, you need explicit, verified parental consent to access social media. They have also implemented sweeping nationwide bans on smartphones in primary and middle schools.
Like completely banning them.
Yeah, physically removing the hardware from the educational space.
Okay. And what's the opposing philosophy?
The education-focused systems, primarily championed by the Nordic countries and the Netherlands, their philosophy treats the digital sphere as an inevitable environment that children must learn to navigate safely, rather than a space they must be locked out of.
So they don't ban the phones.
No. They embed digital and media literacy directly into the core school curriculum, starting in the early primary years.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because we need to look at what's actually happening in the classrooms rather than just abstract policy.
Yeah, the local examples in the report are brilliant.
Look at the Tabasco project in Tilburg in the Netherlands. They partnered with the local university, but instead of bringing an adult to the front of the classroom to deliver, a boring lecture about the dangers of cyberbullying.
Right, which kids just tune out immediately.
Exactly. Instead of that, they handed the power to the students. Picture a classroom of teenagers sitting in a circle, actually writing out scripts and storylines about online harassment.
I love this example.
Then, the program hires popular local social media influencers to act out those student-written scripts on their real channels, modeling empathy and respectful conflict resolution.
It is a stunning reversal. They take the weapon, social media influence, and re-engineer it into a peer-led prevention tool. It speaks to the youth in the language and through the medium they already inherently trust.
It's brilliant.
Another powerful example comes from the Merseyside police in the UK. They partnered directly with schools, but their target demographic wasn't teenagers. It was 6- and 7-year-olds.
6 and 7. We are talking about first graders.
Yeah. They had these young children collaborate to brainstorm, act in, and produce short educational films that depicted scenarios of online grooming and manipulative requests.
At age 6.
Yes. By physically acting out these scenarios in a safe environment, the children learn to define their personal boundaries and understand digital consent years before they are exposed to the real, sophisticated threats in a gaming chat lobby.
It's almost like, think about this like municipal infrastructure. Let's compare the massive EU regulations to a city's central water treatment plant.
Okay, I like this.
The plant's job is to filter the entire city's supply and remove the heavy toxins. But it's far away, it's slow to upgrade, and things slip through the pipes. These local authorities, the teachers in Tilburg, the police in Merseyside, they are the at-home tap filters.
That's exactly it.
Right, they catch the specific localized contaminants right at the point of consumption, right before the child takes a drink.
The tap filter metaphor captures it perfectly. The superpower of local authorities is their proximity. A sweeping law written in Brussels cannot understand the specific local slang or the cultural nuances or the socioeconomic pressures of a specific neighborhood in Naples or a rural village in Finland.
So true.
The local authorities understand the context, that they tailor the intervention, but they suffer from a crippling structural flaw.
Glitch.
Project cycle funding.
The grant money runs out.
Repeatedly, a local municipality secures an EU grant. They build an incredible, tailored anti-cyberbullying program. They spend a year training the educators, the students engaged, the metrics show it is working, and then the 2-year grant expires. The tap filter is removed, the staff are let go, the institutional knowledge evaporates, and the next class of students is left completely exposed.
So we are trying to fight an ecosystem of trillion-dollar tech conglomerates with temporary patchwork municipal grants.
Pretty much.
And that brings us to the horizon. We've examined the current battlefield, but this digital landscape is actively morphing. To understand if any of these local tap filters or central water plants will survive, we have to fast forward.
We do.
The Joint Research Center of the European Commission mapped out 4 foresight scenarios for the year 2040. Let's walk through these possible futures.
The first scenario is grim. It is called storms.
Storms.
Yeah. This envisions
A truly dark timeline. Okay, what is the second projection?
endgame.
That sounds ominous.
It is. This is a reality where public institutions and nation-states have largely ceded their regulatory power to massive global mega corporations. The internet in 2040 is highly integrated, incredibly fast, and frictionless, but it is entirely optimized for relentless data extraction and corporate profit.
So they just own everything.
Exactly. Terms of service agreements effectively replace constitutional rights.
Think about your own phone right now. Under the endgame scenario, the privacy settings you might have tweaked this morning wouldn't be subject to your local laws or your personal preference.
No, not at all.
They would be dictated entirely by a board of directors maximizing shareholder value. Endgame sounds terrifyingly close to where we are now with mega platforms. If we hit the endgame scenario, do local authorities even stand a chance? Or do corporations just become the new parents?
In the endgame scenario, local authorities lose their regulatory teeth almost entirely. They are reduced to begging platforms for minor concessions or running hopelessly underfunded literacy campaigns while the platforms hold total control over the architecture.
Geez. Okay, what's the third scenario?
The third scenario is called struggling synergies.
Which sounds like just hitting copy-paste on today's world.
It essentially is. It projects our current messy reality into the future. We see some decent regulations passed, followed by terrible enforcement. We see a patchwork of brilliant local successes in one city and massive vulnerabilities in the next town over.
So it's incredibly uneven.
Exactly. It is a world of extreme inequality depending entirely on where a child happens to be born.
And the final future.
Opposing views. The globe splits into two polarized digital blocks. Imagine a digital Cold War.
Okay.
You have a regenerative tech alliance that forces its internet to prioritize human rights, privacy, and child safety. Pitted against them is an exploitative alliance that prioritizes pure, unbridled economic growth and relentless algorithmic data extraction.
So two completely incompatible internets operating on the same planet.
Precisely.
Looking at those four futures, storms, endgame, struggling synergies, and opposing views, none of them offer a guaranteed utopia. They're all highly volatile.
Very.
So how do we protect that glowing digital mind in all of these scenarios? What is the common denominator that ensures survival no matter which 2040 we land in?
Well, the report is unequivocal on the resolution. Across all four of these volatile futures, the only safeguard that remains robust is a relentless, two-pronged approach.
What's the first prong?
First, at the foundational architectural level, minors must be legally and technically codified as a distinct, heavily audited risk class.
Meaning?
The law must state that you fundamentally cannot process a 12-year-old's data with the same mechanics you use for a 40-year-old's data. Platforms must bear the burden of proving, through audits and synthetic testing, that their code is safe for developing brains.
Right, shifting the burden again. And the second prong?
Continuous, unrelenting digital literacy education. It cannot be a single assembly in a middle school gymnasium.
Yeah, those don't work.
No, they don't. It must be woven into the daily curriculum from primary school through graduation. Children must understand the mechanics of the algorithms so they can defend themselves against whatever manipulative technology emerges in 2030 or 2040.
So what does this all mean for you? Whether you are raising a child, building a piece of software, or just scrolling through your feed on your morning commute, the rules being written to protect kids today are shaping the baseline of privacy and cognitive freedom for the entire internet of tomorrow.
It is the digital equivalent of pouring curb cuts into city sidewalks.
Oh, I like that. Explain that for a second.
So originally, curb cuts, the little ramps at intersections, were mandated and built specifically to allow wheelchair access.
Okay.
But we quickly realized they improve the ecosystem universally. They help parents pushing strollers, travelers rolling heavy luggage, delivery workers. When you force a system to design for its most vulnerable users, you end up building a less manipulative, more transparent, and vastly superior environment for everyone.
But, and this is the lingering tension we want to leave you with, all of this research forces us to confront a really difficult question. We are rushing to sanitize the digital world to protect youth. And given the data, we absolutely should.
No question.
But human psychological resilience fundamentally requires exposure to adversity. If we use algorithms to perfectly shield a child from every piece of friction, every dark pattern, or every uncomfortable viewpoint online, do we accidentally strip them of their autonomy?
It's a profound question.
If we succeed in building a perfectly padded digital room, do we inadvertently rob them of the digital street smarts they will desperately need to survive the storms or the corporate endgames of the future?
It forces us to examine the razor-thin line between protection and empowerment. I mean, a child who has never encountered a digital scam or who has never had to navigate a manipulative design pattern might eventually become the most vulnerable adult of all when the filters finally come off.
Think back to that opening image, the silhouette of the human head, packed with those glowing digital gears and icons. Our ultimate goal isn't to unplug the light bulb to keep the mind safe in the dark.
Right.
Our job is to ensure the next generation actually owns the wiring. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.